Guess a guy can't leave his insulation out for more than a week here without gosh dang mice making nests everywhere. Welcome back. On this episode of Mason-Dixon Acres, I'm going to be taking this gigantic block of insulation behind me and distributing it all over underneath our concrete slab. This will keep the slab separated from the ground with a thermal break and allow our radiant floor system to work a lot better, being completely isolated from the ground. On top of this will go a 10 mil vapor barrier, which is just a plastic sheet essentially. On top of that will go a grid of number 3 or 3/8 inch diameter rebar in a 12-inch on center grid pattern. And then finally, our radiant tubing will get zip tied to that grid. This has all got to be done before my concrete guy shows up in a week to pour the slab, so I better start hustling. Let's get to it.
I see you over there judging me using the skid steer to move these insulation panels. But hey, they're bulky. They're not heavy, they're bulky.
Here's me almost dropping the entire stack.
I really hate how much plastic these things are packaged in. It's a total waste.
Like a glove. This is how I'm dealing with penetrations in the foam. Since I had mildly good success with this one, I figured I would share it. Basically, it's just butting the foam up square to where you need it. In this case, it was this pipe back here, and I aligned it with that sheet. And then essentially scribing lines back in basically a grid pattern to sort of map out these pipes where they intersect. I basically touch my level up to the side of one, make sure it's square to the panel, scribe the line back, and then go over the distance that I need for this pipe. In the case of 3-inch pipe, it's 3.5 inches to account for the thickness of the walls. Then I do that the other way, which basically gives me a square box where each one of these pipes are. I'll cut that out with my jigsaw, and voila, it falls right over top the pipes. Luckily, I have all my plumbing pretty clustered here, so I only have to do this tedious process on 2 panels, and just a few other cut panels should wrap up the job. What do you think? Is it gonna fit? Only one way to find out. Look at that. I'll take that all day. Despite this gap here, I'll just put a sliver or something in there. Not bad for a second timer, huh? Of course, when I came over here this morning, I forgot to bring the last 7 or 8 sheets of insulation I needed, so just went and grabbed those. That killed about 30 more minutes of my day. So let's keep pushing.
This cordless DeWalt jigsaw was invaluable for cutting all this insulation. It's definitely the go-to saw for it. A lot less dust than a circular saw and a lot straighter and neater than a Sawzall.
And just like that, we are finished. I don't think I mentioned it, but the reason I kept this strip out right here is because we have a load-bearing wall right there, so that is essentially a footing. So I wanted to make sure there was no insulation there between our loaded wall and the gravel, which is essentially serving as the footing. So that's about a foot wide cutout centered on the wall, but the rest of it is all full of insulation. I think it turned out quite nicely.
Hopefully this doesn't drive anyone with OCD completely off the edge, but I purposely left one random panel with the lettering up. And I'm also just now noticing that the first panels laid down have different coloring than all the rest.
Next up is the preparation for our center column that goes up and supports the roof ridge beam. It's rained the past couple days, and when I uncapped this, there was probably 6 inches of water in what is essentially our sump pit right now. So I just spent a little bit of time with my vacuum here, vacuuming out the water, and I think I've got it to a fairly steady state. But the next step is to install this big mama right here. I had my friend at work weld it up for me. He did a fantastic job. It's a shame that this beautiful weld is going to get buried in concrete for the rest of its life, but it is what it is. So I've essentially got to drill 4 holes to anchor this plate to our footing. I'm using these beefy 1/2 inch by 5 inch Tapcon screw anchors to do that. They're definitely overkill, but it is what was spec'd on our plan, so it's what I'm going with. I'll be using this rotary hammer to drill those holes, and I have this fun festive piece of Christmas themed duct tape to tell me how deep I need to drill them, which is 1/2 inch deeper than the screws themselves, so 5.5 inches. And then I'll use an impact driver to drive them all the way in. This is a new pose I'm trying out now that we have this comfortable insulation board to lay on, so let me know how you like it. Strung up my strings, just measuring twice and drilling once.
My 6-year-old iPhone has really gone through a lot since we started this project.
Gotta clean the holes out.
Next, it was time to unroll the vapor barrier. This is a 10 mil polyethylene sheet, quite a bit thicker than the traditional 6 mil, and I'm glad I got it. When we cut it, we left enough to come up about 2 or 3 inches on each edge.
This would be very good slip and slide material. 10 mil polyethylene, I'll remember that. It's only $200 for a roll.
Well, we have some excess, so we might have to try it out on that hill over there. Right down the driveway.
When I'm cutting these, I have the plastic flat up to the bottom here, and my slit needs to be half the diameter of the pipe, so I know my pipe's about that wide, so I'm just eyeballing halfway and then cutting essentially across. This goes down to the base, this goes up about half the pipe diameter. That way when it folds over top the pipe, this is right in the center of the pipe. Now it's time to get this thing taped up. So I got some of this vapor barrier tape. It's all about 4 inches wide. It's polyethylene tape, same material as the vapor barrier itself. And this is probably an extra step. I've seen it done without this tape at all. But we're just gonna throw a run of this through the middle here between the 2 layers and around all of our penetrations as well. And then whatever left over we'll probably use up the sidewall just so that we don't get concrete behind it when it comes time to pour. While Elaina finishes up the tape, I'm gonna get started putting down the rebar grid. I'm using a number 3 rebar, which is 3/8 of an inch diameter, and I'm gonna be putting it at 12 inches on center in a grid pattern across the whole foundation. 12 inches is pretty tight. It's typically larger than that. I actually even had called 16 out on my plans, but then I realized that my radiant tubing is going to be at 12 inches on center, so it's gonna make it a whole lot easier to lay out my tubing if I have a 1x1 grid everywhere else. The center footing for our load-bearing wall in the middle has 2 pieces of number 4 rebar, which is a 1/2 inch diameter, and I also put a couple pieces of number 4 at all of the garage entrances just because that's going to be under a little bit more stress. Probably overkill, but rebar is cheap and you can't put it in after the concrete is poured.
Before we started laying this out, I went around and put marks around the foundation every 1 foot. That way when we were just rough laying these out, we had a good idea where the bars should go to get 1 foot on center. Then came the very tedious task of tying this whole rebar mat together. I started by going around the perimeter and tying every intersection.
Ah, I just broke my glasses. Well, that's a shame. I am fresh out of rebar ties. I was only able to get the perimeter of the mat tied, but in the meantime, before I go to run Home Depot and get a few more bags, I'm going to distribute these little concrete bricks. These are basically what we're going to be using as rebar chairs to hold our rebar kind of in the middle of the slab. I'm putting them every 4 foot throughout the entire slab. This number 3 rebar is pretty thin, so if by any chance it gets stepped on, which it definitely will, it's good to have some fairly close supports.
George.
George, come on. Shh. One other minor detail before we do the pour. When we put these top pieces of insulation back on after the failed wall pour, there was a little bit of concrete that had hardened underneath where they were supposed to be. So some of them are sticking up just a little bit proud of the top of the foundation wall, and that's where we're going to be screwing to. So got my multi-tool here, and I'm just going along, and it just zips it right off flush with the top of the wall.
George, what do you think? You an excited boy.
After I had tied quite a few more locations in the center, the next step was to lift it up on the chairs. That way we could really see what was still loose and needed some more tying. We just used the cheap preformed rebar ties you can get at big box stores and the little hook twister to install them.
How's it going?
It's going. We're almost done tying stuff. We only have probably, I don't know, 60 more ties to do.
The vast abyss of concrete, bricks, rebar, and ties.
Come on, Alex, pull up your pants. Give me a break.
And just like that, after about 650 ties later, the rebar mat is done. It's all up on the concrete brick chairs, and it actually seems to be fairly sturdy. It definitely doesn't support like a full person's weight, but if you step on it outside of a chair, it does pop back up to where it's supposed to be. So we'll just keep an eye on it during the pour. It'll just be nice not to have to rely on the crew to actually pull the rebar off the ground while they're pouring. How'd you think it went?
The tying?
Everything. Everything thus far.
I was gonna say the tying was pretty easy. You have a booger.
I don't see it.
Ew, get rid of it. There you go.
That was a little guy.
It's still there. It's still there. Turn it off. Turn off the camera. We're not.
There are basically 2 last pieces of work before the slab is poured, which is scheduled for Monday morning. Today is Saturday afternoon. So we have a little bit of work ahead of us, but we got to put the radiant tubing in, and we have to put form boards in front of these garage door openings. So I'm going to call this a wrap for today's video. We got through a lot of underslab prep in a pretty short time, and we still have a little bit ahead of us with the radiant tubing, which is going to be a project by itself.
Thanks so much for watching. Make sure to click the thumbs up if you enjoyed it, and we'll see you next week. Hopefully we'll have a slab.